Greetings fellow guitar travellers, it's Rowan J Parker here, back with another episode of Theory and Harmony. And today we're going to be exploring dominant function, which is highly fascinating if you're a theory nerd like me, and I'm sure like you. But before we get into that, here comes the inevitable plug from all my wonderful goods and services. Website www.rowanjparker.com. Tons of free stuff on that site, and you get even more free stuff if you subscribe to the site. Just stick your email address in the subscribe box, hit subscribe, and you get a tsunami, veritable tsunami of free stuff, gratis. Other free stuff on SoundCloud, there's lots of backing tracks there. Follow me on SoundCloud and you can download most of those for free. Now, if you want to support me, you can support me in a couple of ways. If you go to the website, there's a store on the website where you can buy lots of cool, interesting products. You can also get my Rockstar course there, which is being used in many different places, which is a great course. Now, I've also set up what's called a Patreon account, which enables you, dear viewer, to support me by making a donation to recognise the time I spent making all these cool, wonderful free videos for you. Now, all you need to do is just go to Patreon and look for Rowan J Parker, and then you can support me in any way you like. You can pledge as little as $1. I think if you pledge $5 or more, I will personally make you a free video about anything you like. Don't push it though. Alright, otherwise I'm on Facebook, Rowan J Parker, on Twitter if you want, and of course you're watching, hopefully, my YouTube channel, Rowan J Parker. Right, enough of this, let's get on with today's lesson, dominant function, bring it on! Okay, let's explore the properties of these dominant chords. Let's take a very simple dominant chord, G7. Now, what most people know about G7 is that G7 is the fifth chord of C major. And that means it wants to resolve from G7 to C. Right? Oh, I suppose it could resolve to C major 7. So G7 is the 5 chord of C and therefore wants to resolve down a fifth to make a complete and perfect cadence. That's what you call it. G7 being the 5th chord of C and C major being the 1st chord of C. This is the chord progression of 5 to 1, also known as a perfect cadence. And this is the basis of a huge amount of Western music. And that's usually as much as people know about how dominant chords work. That's how they work, right? But you've got to realise the inherent property of a dominant chord is that it wants to resolve down a fifth. It doesn't matter what quality of chord it resolves to, as long as the root of the chord resolves down a fifth, the quality to which you resolve it to really is completely arbitrary. Right? So to demonstrate this, show this. Here's G7 resolving to C major 7, which is a perfect 5-1 cadence. Sounds absolutely fine. Now equally, you can resolve this G7 chord, this dominant chord, to C minor. Or C minor 7. So we can resolve to a major quality chord, or we can resolve to a minor quality chord, C major or C minor, or any of the variations or permutations of those C major or C minor chords. For instance, it could go G7 to, say, C major 9, or we could go G7 to, I don't know, C minor 6/9. It doesn't matter as long as the root resolves down a fifth. So what else can we do? Well, if we think about it, we can make the G7 resolve down a fifth to another dominant chord. It would resolve down a fifth to C7. G7 resolving to C7. Now we'll come back to this relationship in a moment. So we can resolve down a fifth to another dominant chord, right? Now, one other thing we can do, which is unusual, but you still get it, you still hear it, is to have it resolve down a fifth to this quality, minor 7 flat 5. So in this case, C minor 7 flat 5, right? So G7 resolving down a fifth to C minor 7 flat 5. Now, again, I'll give you an example of this in an actual song, because that would normally resolve somewhere else after that. But the point about it is that a dominant chord will resolve down a fifth to any quality of chord whatsoever. It's completely agnostic as to what that is, as long as it gets to resolve down a fifth. Imagine that the dominant chord is like a rather excited child that goes, oh, I really want to resolve down a fifth, I really want to resolve down a fifth, and You know, it's like it wants to go on a journey and it doesn't really care where it goes as long as it goes on that journey. As long as it gets in the car and goes for walkies, it doesn't matter where it goes for walkies. I know I'm mixing my metaphors and giving you awful analogies, but that is the point. The dominant chord resolves down a fifth and it doesn't give a stuff about where it resolves to. Alright. Okay, so that's the first half of it. So now let's give you some actual examples taken out of real songs of the dominant chords behaving in that way. So let's do that. Alright, let's get into these examples then. Here's the first example taken out of very basic major scale harmony, which illustrates usually, traditionally, how dominant chords function. In the key of C major, we have the chord progression C, then F, then G, G7, resolving back to C. Now this is such a commonly used chord progression. It's the basis of vast swathes of Western music, and I don't mean country and Western music. So C to F, to G7, back to C. So in terms of what we might call numerical progression, it's C, then F, then G7, then C, which is 1, 4, 5, 1. Alright, so the G7 resolving to C major, 5 to 1 perfect cadence. Alright, now let's look at the same thing but in a minor key. So we can have much the same sort of chord progression in a minor key. So in a minor key, C minor, we'd have C minor, then F minor, then G7, which would then resolve back to C minor. So this would be 1, 4, 5 in minor rather than major. So this would be 1, and this would be 4, and this would be 5, resolving back to 1. Now the source of this particular chord progression comes out of the harmonic minor scale rather than the natural minor scale. Now if you're confused about this, it is a little bit confusing because although there's only one form of the major scale, which is the major scale, there are 3 commonly used or played forms of the minor scale. You have natural minor, which is otherwise known as Aeolian, you have harmonic minor and you have melodic minor, and each one of these scales produces a different harmonization. So it does muddy the waters somewhat, but in C harmonic minor, this is 1, 4, 5. Excuse me. So that's how that works. Those are the traditional usages of perfect cadence 5 to 1. Let's now examine some other things. So you recall that we said the G7 chord could resolve, for instance, to C7. Well, if we actually expand that further, we can really see how then that could lead to a whole chain of chord progressions. So G7 wants to resolve down a fifth, and it will resolve down a fifth to C7. But now you're on another dominant chord, which could in turn resolve down another fifth. And it could resolve down another fifth to, say, F major or F minor, for instance. But let's say it resolves down a fifth to another dominant 7th chord, F7. And then you can see where this is going. The F7 could then resolve down a fifth to B flat 7. The B flat 7 could resolve to E flat, the E flat to A flat, the A flat to D flat, the D flat to G flat, the G flat to B, and then the B to E, and the E to A, and then the A to D, and then the D finally back to G. Now this particular chord progression is described often as 5 of 5 because it's a dominant chord, a 5 chord, resolving down a fifth to another dominant chord, which resolves down a fifth to another dominant chord, and it's just an endless chain of dominant chords resolving down a fifth, 5 of 5 of 5 of 5 of 5. So for instance, E, A, D, G, C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B, E. All 12 keys. Now if you're into practicing changes, playing over harmony and playing over changes, this is a great chord progression to learn to improvise over, because every time you change chord, you also change key and therefore change the appropriate scales or notes that would fit on each chord. So it's a really great chord progression. Now examples of this in a real song, the jazz standard tune, I Got Rhythm, quite often has a bridge which is constructed out of 5 of 5. So a typical rhythm changes bridge would be something like E7, A7, D7, G7, or if it was in the key of B flat, then I guess it would be D7, G7, C7, F7. That's what it would be in B flat. So those are real examples from real tunes, and you come across this sort of thing all the time. 5 of 5. Here's one other example of dominant chords resolving down a fifth to minor 7 flat 5. In the great jazz standard tune Stella by Starlight, towards the end of the changes of that, the changes at the end are E minor 7 flat 5, A7, D minor 7 flat 5, G7, C minor 7 flat 5, F7, then to B flat major 7. So got E minor 7 flat 5 resolving down to A7. This is what we call the minor 2-5. This would be the minor 2-5 of D minor. But then you can see that this A7 chord doesn't resolve to D major or D minor like you might expect. It resolves to D minor 7 flat 5, which in its turn becomes the 2 of a new key, so 2-5 of C minor. With a G7 resolved down a fifth to another minor 7 flat 5, C minor 7 flat 5, which forms another 2-5, in this case in B flat minor, but the resolution point is actually B flat major. I'll actually do a separate video on the incredible harmony in Stella by Starlight, because it is one of the most beautiful chord progressions that you come across in standard tunes. It's a truly, truly wonderful, and not to say genius, use of chords, which you just don't hear anymore in modern compositions, very sadly. Golden Age of American songwriting was rightly called that, because it was. The intelligence these composers had was really beyond measure. Okay, so example, end of Stella by Starlight, of these chords resolving down and not really caring about where they resolve to, as long as they resolve down a fifth. Alrighty, so I think that really covers most of the usage cases. The best thing you can do is you can mess around with these chords and just figure out how you can get dominant chords to just go wherever you want. It is another tool in your composer's arsenal to enable you to manipulate chords and make them do what you want. Eventually, when you understand enough about harmony, you can take chords and you can make them go anywhere. You're not constrained by rules of harmony, you're aware of them, you know what you can and cannot do, but you can really bend things to make them do whatever you want to do. Alright, that'll do it for this episode. We'll check out on a subsequent episode. Don't forget to look at the website, and please have a look at my Patreon page, and even just a couple of dollars will help me out to keep making these free and hopefully useful videos. Alright, that'll do. So see you next time. Around J Parker. Farewell!